I bought her for $3. A mountain woman no man wanted. With over look Avery only meant to give her work and shelter. But when she said her name, everything he thought he knew was shaken forever. The auction was almost over when Luke Avery saw her. No one was bidding anymore. Not really. Most of the men had grown bored after the cattle and horses were sold. What stood tethered to the post now wasn't stock. She was tall, broad-shouldered, hair unkempt like it had never seen a comb, and her hands looked strong enough to snap a man's neck. Her dress was little more than rags. They called her Mountain Woman, said she'd been found living alone up in the high ridges like a wild thing, trapping and hunting to survive. $3 pesos, the auctioneer barked. That's all I need. $3 for a hard worker, strong back, eats little, don't talk much. Who will take her? The crowd chuckled. A few men nudged each other, making crude remarks Luke ignored. I hadn't come for this. I'd come for fence wire seed, maybe a mule if one sold cheap. But then he thought of his 2 children back at the ranch. Sam, only 9, trying to be a man too soon, and little June, barely 6, still asking for her mother at night. Luke's wife had been gone almost a year now. The house had grown quieter by the day, chores piling up faster than he could manage. The land didn't care that he was grieving. It just took and took. $3, the auctioneer called again, boy's tired now. Someone take her off my hands. Luke raised his hand. I'll take her. A ripple of surprise passed through the few men still lingering. Nobody else bid. Nobody wanted her. Solve. The auctioneer slammed his palm on the table. To the widower or, $3. Luke stepped forward, pressing the coins into the man's hand. The woman turned her head then, just enough for him to see her eyes, dry, sharp, and watchful. The auctioneer untied the rope, thrust it toward Luke. "'Says yours now. Good luck." Luke ignored the laughter that followed him as he led her away from the post. She didn't stumble, didn't look ashamed. She just walked beside him silently, long strides that almost matched his own. He glanced at her as they reached his wagon name. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice rough as gravel, she answered, "Mara." Luke froze. He hadn't heard that name in almost 15 years. The road home was long and rugged. The wagon creaked as they climbed out of town and into the hills. Mara sat on the bench beside him, silent, hands folded in her lap like she'd been carved from stone. Luke couldn't stop thinking about that name. Mara. Years ago, before he'd met his wife, before he'd had children, there had been another life, one he didn't talk about. Mara was a name out of that life. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and red. The house looked smaller than usual, a lonely figure against the endless land. Sam was out front, splitting kindling with an axe far too heavy for his frame. He dropped it when he saw the wagon. June ran out from the porch barefoot, curls bouncing as she called for her father. Luke climbed down. "Got someone to help around here?" He said gruffly, motioning toward Mara. "Her name is Mara. She'll be staying." Sam stared at her. June hid behind her father's leg. Mara only nodded once in greeting, then turned to lift a sack of feed from the wagon like it weighed nothing at all. Sam's eyes widened, but he said nothing. That night after chores were done and the children were asleep, Luke sat at the table staring at Mara across the lamplight. "You're not from around here," he said finally. "No, you knew me once." It wasn't a question. Her gray eyes lifted to meet his. "I did." A chill went through him. "Why'd you say yes to being sold?" he asked. She didn't flinch. "Because say $3 is better than starving, and because I wanted to see if you remember me." Luke's breath caught. Memories he'd buried deep began to stir, of a younger man, reckless and full of fire, and a woman who'd walked away before he could ruin her life. But before he could speak again, a loud rap sounded on the door. Luke shot to his feet, heart pounding. Nobody knocked on his door after dark. He crossed the room and yanked it open. And there stood a man he hadn't seen in years, smiling like a wolf. "Well," the man drawled, stepping over the threshold without asking. "Avery didn't think I'd find you out here. And look at this." You bought yourself company. Luke's stomach turned to ice. The man's eyes slid to Mara and lit up with recognition. Well, now, he said softly, ain't this something? The man filled the doorway like he owned the night. Dusty boots, a coat worn from travel, and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Luke is stiff in it. He hadn't seen Eli Warded in over a decade, but the years hadn't changed him much. Eli had the kind of charm that rotted on the inside, smooth voice, sly hands, and a way of twisting everything into his favor. Luke's hand twitched toward the rifle hanging by the hearth before he stopped himself. Eli didn't need to see that kind of welcome. Didn't know you, that's down, Luke? Eli troubled, stepping farther into the room. His gaze swept over the sparse furnishings. The children's boots lined neatly by the door and finally landed on Mara. Mara, Eli said, slow and deliberate, like savoring a taste he'd almost forgotten. Didn't think I'd see you again either. Mara's jaw clenched. She didn't answer. Luke's mind span. Eli Ward of all people. And Mara knowing him too. What do you want? Luke asked flatly. Eli shrugged, spreading his hands like he just stopped by for neighborly talk. Just passing through, saw a familiar wagon. Thought I'd say hello. But Luke knew Eli better than that. He didn't just pass through anywhere without a reason. The silence stretched, tense as a drone boring. Nice setup you've got, Eli said at last, looking around. 2 kids, a woman, almost like you've got yourself a family again. Luke stepped forward, blocking his view of the table where Mara sat stiff as stone. Say what you came to say, Eli. Eli is Mirkit. All right. Word is there's folks looking for Mara up north. Folks with money. You hand her over, I walk away and you won't hear from me again. Luke's chest tightened. He glanced at Mara. She didn't flinch. Didn't they, Eli? Eli is Mirkit. All right. Word is there's folks looking for Mara up north. Folks with money. You hand her over, I walk away and you won't hear from me again. Luke's chest tightened. He glanced at Mara. She didn't flinch. Didn't they deny it? Eli leaned against the door frame, casual as a man in a saloon. Says worth more than $3, I bet. Worth a hell of a lot more. And you and I, we both know money has been tight since. Well, since you buried your wife. The jab hit like a fist to the gut, but Luke didn't move. Get out, Luke said quietly. Eli tilted his head. You sure? Think about the kids. Land like this eats a man alive if he can't keep up. I'm offering you a way out. Luke's jaw locked. He said get out. The smirk vanished. Eli stepped forward, the air shifting darker. Careful, Luke. You always thought you were better than me, but you and I, we're the same. We both know how to take what we want. Mara finally stood, her chair scraped loud against the floor. You're not taking anything, she said, voice low but steady. Eli turned toward her slowly, eyes glinting. You always did have spirit. Shame you wasted it on the wrong man. Luke stepped between them. Eli laughed once, cold and humorless. Fine, keep her, but don't say I didn't warn you. He brushed past Luke and yanked the door open. Before leaving, he glanced back, eyes sharp as broken glass. They come for her, Luke, and when they do, you'll wish you'd taken my offer. The door slammed shut behind him. The room stayed quiet long after Eli's footsteps faded. The fire popped softly in the hearth. Luke finally turned to Mara. What was that about? Her face was pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table like she needed it to stay upright. It's not wrong, she said at last. There are people looking for me, but not for the reasons he thinks. Luke waited. Mara's eyes met his. He wasn't born in those mountains. He ran there because the man I was supposed to marry murdered my brother and his family wants me dead for telling the truth. The words hit hard, cold and heavy. Luke sat back slowly, memories stirring of the last time he'd seen Mara years ago when she'd been younger, fierce, and unafraid to fight for what she believed. He'd admired her once, even loved her in a way, but she left before either of them could ruin the other. And now here she was at his table with danger riding on her heels. That night Luke barely slept. Every creak of the wind, every groan of the old house had him up and watching the windows. Mara sat by the fire until dawn, sharpening a hunting knife like it was second nature. Sam stirred first, rubbing his eyes as he sat up on the pallet by the hearth. "Pace," he whispered. Luke motioned him quiet. "Go wake your sister. Get your boots on." Mara glanced up. "Do you think he'll be back?" Luke nodded. "Eli doesn't walk away from anything. If he says they're coming, they're coming." By the time the sun broke over the hills, Luke had saddled the horses, packed what food they could carry, and doused the fire. Sam helped load the rifles, his small face set with grim determination far beyond his years. June clung to Mara's hand, silent but wide-eyed. As Luke tightened the last strap on the wagon, he looked out across the land, his land. Leaving felt like another death. But he'd buried enough already. They set out before the morning mist had lifted, wheels creaking softly over frozen ground. Mara rode beside Luke again, silent, her grey eyes scanning the horizon. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "No," Luke replied. "This is Eli's fault and whoever's riding with him." She didn't argue, but her hand stayed clenched tight in her lap. Hours passed in heavy silence. Every bend in the trail felt like it could hold trouble. And then trouble found them. The first shot cracked through the still air, splintering the wagon rail beside Luke's head. Sam screamed. Hune ducked low, clinging to Mara. "Down," Luke roared, snapping the reins as the horses lurched forward. Shots broke from the tree line. 3 riders, faces covered, guns raised. Mara grabbed the rifle, spun, and fired. One of the men reeled back, clutching his arm as his horse bucked wildly. Another shot tore through the wagon cover inches from Sam's head. Luke called the horses hard toward the river bend, heart hammering, knowing this trail too well, knowing where it narrowed, where it might give them a chance. "Hold on," he shouted. The wagon hit a rut, nearly tipping, and June screamed. Baying them, the riders closed in fast. Luke's stomach dropped as he realized exactly where the trail ended. A steep bluff sheer dropped straight into the river below. And the horses weren't stopping. The bluff rose up too fast, the wagon wheels screaming as they hit rock. Luke yanked hard on the reins, but the horses were wild with fear, hooves scraping and sliding on the frozen ground. The edge loomed closer, 10 more feet, 5. And then Mara was already moving, throwing herself off the bench and grabbing the bridle of the lead horse with both hands. "Well," she roared, her voice cutting through the chaos. The horse reared, muscles straining, eyes rolling white. Mara held on like a woman born to wrestle mountains, digging her heels into the earth, every muscle in her arms standing out as she fought to drag the terrified animals back from the edge. The wagon pitched sideways, one wheel lifting. Sam screamed, clutching June against his chest. "Mara!" Luke obeyed, leaping from the seat to shove his shoulder against the wagon frame, his boots skidding in the dirt. With a final heave, Mara wrenched the horse's head around. The team stumbled back a step, enough for Luke to slam his weight down and level the wagon just before it tipped. For a breath, everything froze. Then another shot rang out. The bullet smashed into the wagon bed, splinters flying. Mara spun, rifle in hand, and fired in one fluid motion. The nearest rider's head flew off as he ducked, his horse veering wildly. Luke bolted back onto the bench, snapping the res. The horses lurched forward again, this time away from the bluff, pounding across the rocky path. The riders regrouped fast. 2 of them broke wide, flanking, while the third charged straight up the middle. Sam under the tarp. "Hold your sister," Luke shouted. The boy didn't argue. He pulled June down with him just as another bullet tore through the canvas. Mara fired again, the recoil slamming into her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. Her shot hit the lead rider's horse in the flank, sending it crashing sideways into a tangle of scrub and rock. 2 left. They rode hard, relentless, one cutting ahead toward the narrow pass Luke had been aiming for. "They're trying to box us in," Mara shouted. Luke's jaw clenched. He knew this land better than anyone, but not with a wagon, not with 2 kids in the back. He snapped the reins and steered hard for the river crossing instead. The water would be near freezing, the current fast, but it was the only chance they had. The wagon thundered down the embankment, wheels bouncing over roots and stone. The river came into view. A wide churning stretch of grey water mist rising off its surface. Behind them, hoofbeats closed in. Luke didn't think. It drove the team straight into the shallows. Easy water splashed high, soaking through boots and coats instantly. The horses screamed, fighting the current, but they kept moving. Muscles straining as the wagon groaned under the pull of the river. Mara reloaded fast, her fingers steady despite the shaking of the wagon. She fired again, the shot echoing off the water. One rider veered off, his horse panicking as the river swallowed its hooves. The last man pressed forward, eyes blazing, determined to cut them down, even if it meant running. Luke urged the horses harder, the water rising to the wagon bed, soaking the tarp where Sam and June huddled. The wheels ground against unseen rocks beneath the surface, every second threatening to tear them free. Almost there, Luke shouted. Mara fired her last round. The shot hit clean, knocking the rifle from the man's hands. It cursed, hauling his horse back as the animal flailed in the rushing water. And then the wagon jolted violently as one wheel slammed against a submerged boulder. The axle groaned, wood splintering. Luke, Mara yelled. He whipped the reins hard, urging the horses forward with every ounce of strength in his arms. The wheel caught again and then finally broke free. The wagon lurched up the far bank, water cascading off the sides. Luke didn't stop, didn't dare look back until they'd made it up onto solid ground again. When he finally risked a glance over his shoulder, the riders were gone. For now, they didn't stop until they put 3 miles between them and the river, the wagon groaning with every turn of its battered wheels. Luke pulled the team into a stand of pines, finally letting the horses rest. Steam rose off their coats in the chill air, breath coming in harsh clouds. Sam crawled out from under the tarp, soaked and shivering, clutching June's hand tight. "You okay?" Luke asked, voice rough. Sam nodded, teeth chattering. June buried her face in his chest and refused to look up. Mara slid down from the wagon, water streaming from her skirts. She checked the horses first, running a hand along their trembling necks before turning to Luke. "We can't keep running like this," she said. "Not with the kids, not with a wagon they can track." Luke rubbed a hand over his face. "We can't go home either. Ellie will go straight there." Mara met his eyes. "Then we go higher into the ridges. They won't follow far up there." He stared at her, remembering the stories about the woman they'd called wild, who'd lived alone, where few men dared to tread. "You know the mountains." She nodded once better than anyone. Luke exhaled, "All right, you lead." They traveled until dusk, the land turning rougher, paths narrowing to little more than deer trails. Mara moved with purpose, every step sure-footed as if the earth itself had shaped her to walk it. By the time they made camp, the sky was black and the children were asleep almost before the fire caught. Luke sat across from Mara, the flames throwing shadows across her sharp features. "You said they're looking for you," he said quietly. She stared into the fire. "They won't stop until I'm dead." "Why?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I told the truth, and men like them don't forgive women who don't stay silent." Luke didn't answer right away. He looked at his sleeping children, at Sam curled protectively around June, and something cold and furious stirred in him. "They'll have to get through me first," he said. Mara's eyes met his. For the first time since he bought her, something flickered there. Not just defiance, something like hope. But far off in the darkness, a wolf howled, a lone, mournful sound that carried through the pines. Luke's hand drifted toward his rifle. Because hope didn't mean safety. Not out here. The night was restless. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind through the pines had Luke awake, rifle in hand, scanning the shadows. Mara never truly slept either. She sat with her back against a tree, knife in her lap, her eyes reflecting firelight like an animal that had learned to survive by never letting down its guard. By down, frost coated the ground in a thin, brittle layer. Luke rose quietly, boots crunching softly as he checked on the horses. One of them favored a front leg strained from the river crossing. It would hold for now, but not for long. Mara joined him without a word, crouching to feel along the horse's tendons with skilled fingers. "We'll need to walk the ridge slowly," she said, "too steep for a lame horse." Luke nodded. He wasn't used to taking orders, but something about her certainty made it easy to follow. They broke camp quickly. Sam carried June on his hip, his small face set in a grim determination Luke had come to hate seeing on a boy so young. The trail ahead wound sharply upward, switchbacks carved by deer hooves and the occasional boot of a trapper who'd long since vanished from the land. The higher they climbed, the quieter it became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. By mitad, they reached a rocky outcrop that looked out over the valley. From up here, Luke could see his entire world stretched below the narrow river, the broken patchwork of pasture and timber, and far to the east, the faint smudge of the town where he'd spent $3 and unknowingly bought back a piece of his past. Sam joined him, eyes wide. But we can see everything. Luke rested a hand on his shoulder. Yeah, but they can see us, though. We keep moving. Mara had already scouted ahead, vanishing into the tree and returning as silent as a shadow. There's an old trapper's cabin half a mile up. Roof has gone in, but walls are solid. Will it hide us? Luke asked. Her mouth twitched long as no one knows where to look. They reached the cabin just before dusk. The place was little more than 4 log walls half sunk into the earth. The roof collapsed under years of snow, but it was shelter, and Luke had learned not to be picky. They set about clearing the debris. Mara worked like a force of nature, hauling beams twice her size while Luke cut branches for a new roof frame. Sam tried to help, his skinny arms struggling with each load of brush. Here, Mara said, her voice gentler than Luke had ever heard it. She crouched beside Sam, showing him how to weave the branches tighter. Stronger this way. Sam's eyes lit with quiet pride as he got it right, his chest puffing just a little. Luke watched, something twisting in him at the sight. It wasn't just that she was strong or capable. It was that his children, were starting to look at her like she belonged.